Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum to everyone who's taken the time out to come and join us for this very special session. Jazakallah for doing so. Today we're joined by Abid Khan Sahib, who is the International Press Secretary, Press and Media Secretary for Jamaat Ahmadiyya. Abid Sahib has taken time out of his very busy schedule to be here with us today. Jazakallah Abid Sahib for doing so.
Jazakallah.
And assalamu alaikum. Abid Sahib, how are you today?
Yes, assalamu alaikum. Nice to be here. And it's it's really great to catch up with the students and stuff, at least via Zoom, if we can't do it in person.
Jazakallah. And AMSA is honored to have you with us today, Abid Sahib. So without further ado, if we get into the first question, Abid Sahib. So during an interview in Canada with Peter Mansbridge, I believe back in 2016, beloved Huzoor actually foretold of the civil unrest in America. And at the time, it was an unheard of thing that there would be this type of civil unrest in America. But with the recent Black Lives Matter protests, this is exactly what we're seeing. And it's incredible that Huzoor was able to sort of tell us about this back in 2016. I wanted to ask you, Abid Sahib, is there any other sort of similar examples to this?
Assalamu alaikum, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's a very interesting question. And I mean, I remember that Peter Mansbridge interview that you're referring to very clearly, that Huzoor was in the mosque in Canada and they were talking about the potential election of Donald Trump. And the guest or the journalist, asked Huzoor that if he's elected, what will be the consequences? And then Huzoor spoke about that if he disregards the rights of people and isn't fair and just, then he even fears that there's potential civil war. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are watching, who are joining us now, have probably seen that clip where that you can see how stunned to some extent the journalist is. He wasn't expecting that question. And I remember subsequently, Huzoor himself told me that it wasn't something that Huzoor had planned to say or something that Huzoor had thought about necessarily even before that. But he said at that point, in that moment, there was something from Allah Ta'ala that made him say those words. And you're right that in the last few months, there have been things that have happened in the United States that make what Huzoor had said at the time seem quite prophetic. Obviously, there was the George Floyd incident, which then sparked off the Black Lives Matter movement and increased its scope. And we saw even protests here in the UK. And even in the last few days, I'm sure you probably heard about there's been another attack on a Black person, Jacob Brown. And again, now in Wisconsin, there's a lot of problems and people are up at night and they're protesting. So, I mean, this is certainly one of the lessons that I've learned, and I think it's good for students as well, because I'm sure a lot of the students will be from time to time taking the guidance of Huzoor. And also then it's our job as Khudam to convey the guidance of Khalifatul Masih to the outside world, to the others. And for that, it's very important that we have this innate trust and faith that whatever Khalifa Waqt says, there is wisdom in it, there is truth in it. And sometimes we may be ignorant of the reasons and what the future holds, but we must have that confidence. And inshallah, time will always prove that the words of the Khalifa come true. And to give one other example that springs to mind is the Arab Spring, which in 2011, a lot of countries, starting with Tunisia, but then others, suddenly, almost overnight, millions of people came out onto the streets and in popular revolt against their governments. And I remember at the time, the media across the world, a lot of politicians across the world were supporting these protests. And they were, I'm sure, seeing their own interests, certainly in terms of the governments who were supporting it. But people came on the streets, they thought it's a wonderful thing. Even some of our MDs who were from Arab countries, because they had grown tired of their rulers or their leaders, they were quite happy initially and wanted to join these protests. But Huzoor very clearly in a sermon at the time, said that to take up arms or to violently rebel against your leaders is not the Islamic way, which some people were then at that time using, going beyond the limits of what is decent. And Huzoor said that the consequences of this revolt will not be good. And the reason for that is that the Muslim world itself is not united. And they have so much division, internal division, that, okay, some government might replace the current government, but it's not going to mean that everything is peaceful. And I remember at that time that amongst the leaders of the world, whether religious leaders or political leaders, Huzoor really did stand apart. Almost everybody else, because of the pressures or their own views, were in support of it. But Huzoor said that the results aren't going to be good. And now if you fast forward the clock 8-9 years, I think every single one of those countries, almost without exception, is in a worse state than it was. I mean, just look at Syria, what's happened there. Hundreds of thousands of people have died. And then it was as a result of those revolutions, or at least in part of those revolutions, and the lack of stability that it caused, that the terrorist group Daesh was able to form so easily and overnight, take up space, take up land, conquer land. And over a couple of years, it reached complete misery and chaos, and did so many brutalities in the name of Islam. In Libya, I mean, it's just been relentless how from government to government or military coups, whatever's been tried. But you can tell that people have got their eyes on the material wealth of that country rather than have the interests of at the heart of the people of that nation. And that's what Khalifatul Masih has. So yes, I mean, that was just one example that springs to mind.
Jazakallah. And another question we wanted to ask you is that since the end of March, the lockdown has changed lives of many people across the UK. And we wanted to ask you, as the International Press Secretary for Jamaat, how has lockdown changed your work at all, if anything?
Yes, I mean, certainly for the several years, I've written about this in my diaries as well. I've had this great honor to be able to travel for mulaqat every day and have this honor. And it's, I mean, the highlight of my day without a shadow of doubt, but also a means of learning, guidance for my office, guidance for the Jamaat has been received through those meetings. So I remember when the day of, I think it was 23rd of March, but around then anyway, when Boris Johnson announced the lockdown, I had mulaqat that day, and it was just before his speech. And I had a feeling that he was going to announce a lockdown because that's what the media had been speculating. And so I asked Huzoor, I said that, Huzoor, if he announces a lockdown, what are my instructions? And Huzoor said that if it's a lockdown, then you should follow the law, and then you will stay at home and work from home. And I felt really, really deflated, I have to admit. I mean, like I say, for 9-10 years, I was having this honor of coming daily. And then this lockdown, if it came, would suddenly bring a grinding halt to that. And I guess looking at the despondency on my face, Huzoor reads faces better than anyone else, then he just smiled and he said, Baki phone par rabta, that the rest we can talk on the phone or communicate on the phone. And I didn't understand what Huzoor meant by that. I thought perhaps it would just mean that sometimes if there's something urgent, then Huzoor might give a message through Private Secretary Saab or something along those lines. And anyway, sure as anything, later that night, Boris Johnson did announce that lockdown. And I was looking, trying to see if there's any way that I can still go to Islamabad without breaking the law. And I thought I'd found a reason. But when I mentioned it to Huzoor, because obviously I couldn't come, he said that you should continue to work from home during this period, but you can come once a week to meet me in Islamabad and face to face. So certainly my life did change in that respect. That and plus obviously I wasn't going to the office as well, but very out of Huzoor's immense grace and kindness, a day or two later, or 3 or 4 days later, Huzoor started, too much to my surprise, phone mulaqats, which was something completely new, where Huzoor around this time or a little bit earlier, Huzoor would graciously call me through the Private Secretary Sahib, and I would have this opportunity to speak to Huzoor. In the first few days, I wasn't expecting the calls, to be honest, and so I wasn't properly prepared. And I was rushing around in my house trying to find a quiet space to I've got three young children who were at home as well, so just finding a quiet spot. But then I found it. But then like I said, the first couple of times I wasn't quite ready, but Huzoor was very gracious. He didn't mind. But then after the second time, I think he realized that he's not expecting my call. So then Huzoor said, you should prepare every day the way you would in normal situation, and then you can have mulaqat over the phone. And those, in its own way, the last few months have been very, very special in that regard, to have this opportunity, which I never imagined, that to speak to Huzoor. And in some ways, it's even more intimate or on the phone. I mean, it's a lot more scary for me. In real, when you're in front of Huzoor, you can see his expressions. You can see if Huzoor is working on something. So then if I know that if Huzoor is working on something or he looks like he's busy, then I'll keep quiet. But when it's on the phone, I have no idea if Huzoor is engaged with something else, or if he's smiling, if he's serious, that facial. So the thing is that that side of it was definitely tougher. But the guidance I've received and the instructions have been just the same. That's enabled my office and my work to continue. I remember, we mentioned earlier about the Black Lives Matter. When the George Floyd killing happened a few months ago, over a series of mulaqats via the phone, even though it was the lockdown, Huzoor gave me daily guidance about how the Jamaat should respond, how MDs should respond to this, because a lot of MDs wanted, especially young people, wanted to take part in Black Lives Matter's protests and were very, very passionate. So then Huzoor explained what are the true Islamic ways to follow and to respond to these things, and why we have to take a measured approach. And Huzoor gave slogans which were supremacy of justice and innocent lives matter, and then he explained them. Similarly, I mean, just earlier today as well, I had a phone mulaqat not long before this meeting, and in the meeting, we've got MTA News, we've got a new broadcast coming out on Friday, inshallah, and I always present our program, especially the ones that pertain to Huzoor, to guide on and to see if everything we wish to show is appropriate. And so then today, how it happened, and it's happened another time during this period, that Huzoor was watching it in his office, but then as he was watching it, he was giving me instructions that this part needs editing, this part needs correcting. So no matter what, whatever the circumstances are, Huzoor does not let the work suffer. And we see that now also with the blessings of, you probably heard that in the last few weeks, Huzoor started virtual mulaqats with different delegations who were supposed to come to the UK this year to meet him. But because obviously they couldn't meet him, first 2 groups from Canada, and then this past weekend, 2 groups from Holland were able to have that blessed interaction with Huzoor, where Huzoor is in his office, they were in their mosques, and then face-to-face via, just like we are chatting now. And that has been a really interesting experience and a privilege to witness those meetings and Huzoor interacting in that way. And alhamdulillah, it's just one of those things that Huzoor's not going to let the work stop. And that's an example for all of us as well in our lives and in our Jamaat work, that we shouldn't consider, or I hope we haven't considered these past few months as a time for rest and respite from Jamaat work, that we're at home, there's nothing we can do. Rather, we should always be looking for new things and new avenues to defend Islam or to fulfill our whatever duties the Jamaat has given us.
Jazakallah. And there was a really interesting part in your recent diary around the lockdown, Abid Sahib, where it was about how you told Huzoor, beloved Huzoor, that people are thinking that Huzoor might get some time to rest during the lockdown, but actually it's the other way around for beloved Huzoor, that Huzoor's just as busy, if not more busy during this time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any change in terms of Huzoor's working hours compared to pre-lockdown. I mean, obviously, family mulaqats can't take place at the moment because it's just not practical. But during that time, whatever other pending work, there's for so many Jamaats that are sending their issues, that the time is covered anyway. So I mean, morning to evening, I mean, the PS office and the staff, they tell me this as well, that there's no change in Huzoor's schedule like that. Whereas people like us, I'm sure the viewers as well, we would always want, out of our love for Khilafat, for Huzoor to take some time to have some rest. But on the other side, his love for Jamaat and his dedication and devotion means that even though this was a prime opportunity from the perspective of it being a lockdown, Huzoor's work has continued the same.
And Abid Sahib, you've been fortunate enough to travel with beloved Huzoor on many of his international tours, and accompany the Qafla on those tours. And through your diaries, you know, there's incident after incident that's very faith-inspiring to read and very enjoyable to read. For the audience, would there be a particular incident that you'd be able to share with us today?
I mean, there's countless incidents. It's hard to narrate any one incident. I mean, I'll give you a couple. One is a personal incident that I was just thinking about today, which is why I'm mentioning it, because it's fresh in my mind. I remember in Australia in 2013, Huzoor, it was a very, very busy tour. It was 1 month in Australia, apart from some other countries, which made it a 7-week tour in total. But we went towards the end of the trip, Huzoor went to a fruit park, and it was one of the rare times that there was any time for rest. And it was a 2 or 3 hour break. And in this fruit park, it was basically acres and acres of land. And there was beautiful different types of fruit that were being tasted, that you could taste, exotic fruits. But what they had done, the Jamaat Intizami, I think, is they'd split it into 2 groups. One group was Huzoor, Hazrat Apajan, and their Amir Sahib, or 1 or 2 other people. And then the second group was the rest of the Qafla, including myself and other members. And I remember I was in the second group, but we were at a distance a few minutes behind where Huzoor was. And they were treating us to these lovely fruits or whatever. But in my heart, I wasn't enjoying it. I was just thinking that I'm here in this fruit park, but they put me in this other group. And I really, really wish I was in Huzoor's group and being able to spend this precious time with him. And just as I was thinking this, we were going on a buggy from one part of the park to the other park. Suddenly, one of the Khuddam on duty came rushing in another buggy, and he started shouting, "Where is Abid Sahib? Where is Abid Sahib?" And so then I heard him. I looked up. I said, I raised my hand. I said, "I'm here." And he very frantically said, "Huzoor's calling you. Huzoor's calling you." And I remember in my heart, I was just really happy that I'm getting out of this group and hopefully going to see Huzoor, but also hoping that whatever Huzoor requires, it's okay and there's no problem. So then I jumped into his buggy, and he took me to Huzoor. And Huzoor was actually by that point in a small farm. There was a farm area in there, and in there was a number of kangaroos. And I mean, I'm not the most animal-friendly person. My family and friends will tell you that I'm really underestimating that. But anyway, Huzoor called me towards these kangaroos, and he said, and they were hopping about quite fast, and they looked quite big and imposing. And Huzoor said, "Ke inko khalao, ke you feed these kangaroos." And I inside, I felt a bit petrified. I have to be honest. But I didn't want to convey that, but I'm sure Huzoor noticed it. And then he smiled and he said, "Chalo main bhi aa jata hu," that I'll come as well. So then Huzoor walked towards the enclosure where the kangaroos were. And he crouched down and he took some of the feed from one of the employees at the farm. And he started feeding it very, very lovingly. He just put out his hand, and the kangaroo very, very beautifully started taking the feed. And then Huzoor called me and he said, told me a gesture to crouch down like he was. And then Huzoor put a little bit of the feed in my hand, and he said to put my hand forward towards it. So I put it forward. And it's actually quite amazing that when Khalifa Waqt tells you to do something or supports you, how much courage it gives you. And even though before I was nervous, at that point, I remember all my nerves just completely dissipated, and I was really, really happy to do so. And I put my hand forward, and the kangaroo started eating from my hand, and then another kangaroo came and was eating from Huzoor's hand. So that was a really precious moment that I'll never forget. And like I say, it was in my mind earlier today, which is why I've...
One more question that we had for you, Abid Sahib, is that many students over the years have had the blessed opportunity to have a sitting with beloved Huzoor. And Huzoor has given a lot of guidance to students. With the current COVID-19 situation, many students are very anxious about starting university and how their education is going to be affected. I was wondering if you could share any of Huzoor's guidance for students to sort of alleviate any of these worries.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that I think in terms of this, obviously, any students who are going, if they're physically going to university and they are going to be on campus and stuff, they should be taking all the precautions that are mandated by the university. But also, if you look at this coronavirus crisis, even before the government was taking it seriously, Huzoor had given a series of khutbat in which he had spoken about the need to take all possible precautions. And so on the one side, obviously they should take precautions, keep their distance where possible. And this is, I mean, if you look at the example of Islamabad, the markaz where Huzoor lives, I think you probably, I don't think I've seen a finer example of social distancing and following the precautions. Whenever I go there, everybody is at a certain distance, even if the people who are working in the mosque for many weeks, it was an empty mosque. When the government allowed people to come in, even after that time, for some weeks, it's remained an empty mosque. Now people have started to come who live locally, but even that is very, very limited. So the thing is that the students should take whatever precautions they can take, but then obviously they have to get on with their studies if their classes are taking place. But that's where you obviously then trust in Allah, make sure that they pray and write to Huzoor. And if they have some specific concerns over their health or anything like this, or if they have any conditions, and then obviously they should write to Huzoor and seek his guidance for their specific cases.
Jazakallah. Abid Sahib, we also wanted to ask you that over the years, we've seen, and especially through this week with Huzoor, we've seen that many journalists and many dignitaries have now had the chance to have a sitting with beloved Huzoor. And, they often have very profound reactions and, are often very happy that they've had this opportunity. Over the years, do you think there's been a change in the way that the media and dignitaries in particular are now interacting with the Jamaat?
I think, I mean, if we first go with media, I think in the terms of the Western media, there's long been, I think it's I'm not saying anything new, an agenda, anti-Islam agenda that pervades the media, that people, the media, the way they report things is often done in a way that is unfair to Islam, that makes Muslims appear to be people who cannot be trusted. It highlights the negative issues and does not focus on the countless positive stories regarding Islam. I mean, I learned this lesson very, very early on, and it's something that I've never forgotten, that I was appointed to the press office in 2007. And just a few weeks after was the Jalsa Salana. And at that time, I was completely on my own. There was nobody else in my office. And we were under the instructions of Huzoor, we were told to obviously invite the media to Jalsa. And so I didn't really know what to do, but so I just got a directory of different journalists and media outlets. And I started calling them one by one and saying that we're holding this convention. And I was quite excited from my side. I thought I had a lot to sell. I was saying that there's around 30,000 people gathering together, Muslims, and we're going to have this convention, spiritual convention. There's things like the Bai'at, where we pledge allegiance to the Caliph. And so from my perspective, because I mean, Jalsa is at the highlight of our year, I thought that they would be really, really interested in it. But through the calls, I realized that they were not that interested. And then, or the majority anyway, some of them were more polite than others. But one of the national outlets, media outlets, they asked me and they said, what is actually happening? I mean, you've said there's going to be 30,000 Muslims, but what are they going to be doing? And so again, from my perspective, quite naive, I said to them, I said, they're going to be talking about peace and about the true Islamic teachings of Islam and unity and loyalty to these countries, which I mean, again, I thought that the media is going to be very happy to hear this. But I was astounded by the answer at the time, but now I'm less so. But the journalist said to me, she said that sounds very, very mundane. It's not really newsworthy that people, she said that you've got 30,000 people, and she was very frank, she said, you've got 30,000 people who are gathering together to talk about peace. If you can find me 10 Muslims who are going to burn the British flag, we'll be right there. But 30,000 people talking about peace, that's no interest to us. And so that was quite disheartening, but also very eye-opening. And then over the years, again, we've tried to invite journalists and media to our events. And quite often that's the response we get, that it's not newsworthy talking about peace or why Islam is a solution for these times. Sometimes through persistence, and I'm sure through the prayers of Khalifatul Masih, we have more success, but sometimes we don't. So from that overall agenda-wise, I think there hasn't been that much change, and the agenda against Islam is still visible. But from a different perspective, there has been some change. And very early, Huzoor told us, to our team, that we should be making personal relations with journalists. It shouldn't be that we only invite them when we need them, but we should have friendly relations with them, get to know them, so that on a personal level, they get to understand what our beliefs are, what our practices are. And so over the last few years, we've met with hundreds of journalists just for coffee or invited them to look around the mosque. And that has an impact, that certainly they have a lot of questions that normally they might not necessarily have the time to raise. And certainly if they're coming to cover our events, they wouldn't have the time to raise. And then the good results of that is that when later on, when they have issues about religion or Islam that they wish to cover, some of them now come to us themselves and say that we've got this story, can you give us a representative to talk about Islam, or to talk about, or give the Islamic perspective, or what your views are as a community. So it's a slow process, but I mean, certainly that side of it, which is based on Huzoor's guidance of making yourself friendly relations with the journalists, getting to know them on a one-to-one basis, bring into the mosque, that certainly has an effect. But if overall, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Jazakallah. Abid Sahib, I'm wary of the time, but if we could just squeeze in one final question that we've had from our audience today. Is there any sort of guidance that you received from beloved Huzoor during your time as a student, or is there any sort of guidance that you've seen students get from beloved Huzoor during your time as press secretary? If there's any of those incidents you could please share with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously Huzoor has always encouraged students to work hard, to study hard, and to do justice to their work. But above and beyond that, I've always seen that Huzoor has always told students, whether they're young teenagers or those going into university, that they must prioritize the 5 daily prayers and offering it. And it's very, very easy. I've been through university myself here in the UK, and I know what it's like, that student life can distract you, both the work side of it, the social side of it, from your religious faith and your religious obligations. But and that's, Huzoor's very conscious and aware of that. And so regularly, time and time again, Huzoor says to students that they must be regular in offering their prayers and not neglect that. And if you are focused upon your namaz, your salat, then naturally that creates a defense which saves you from the perils, from the temptations that no doubt are there in university for young people. And just to that's the same advice Huzoor would give to even to Jamia students I've seen as well. That Huzoor is always, some of them have told us that Huzoor is, when they've entered, they expected Huzoor to say to them, okay, you need to work hard, or you need to do this, or I want you to excel. But invariably, they've always mentioned to me that Huzoor's told us when we went to Jamia that be punctual, be regular in namaz, and the rest will take care of itself.
Abid Sahib, Jazakallah so much for the time that you've given us today. We understand, you're extremely busy and you've taken time out of your schedule to be here with us today. Jazakallah, and Jazakallah from our audience as well, and Jazakallah to everyone who's taken the time to tune in today.
No, Jazakallah, it's my pleasure. Assalamu alaikum.